Twitter.
Barry Lynn,
her
the
just-
Reverend Barry Lynn.
Yeah, like her just
he
speaking.
is he's a Reverend in the United Church of Christ. He's also an attorney admitted to the Supreme Court's bar. And he also is he believes he is likely to remain the only person in history to win both the Hugh Hefner First Amendment Award and the Freedom of Worship Medal from the Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt Institute. And I was speaking with Barry about this earlier, and it's like, the only person in history you're going to remain forever? Because I can sort of see like there's a civil rights thread there, and like maybe somebody else, could rise up and do that. Maybe even somebody at Americans United. And Barry said to me, well, August, accidents happen. So Barry's got that locked down. Don't try to win both of those awards. Very risky for your health. Join me in welcoming Barry to the stage.
Really nice to be back here. It's nice to get out of Washington, a place where, of course, we are well beyond the dawn and already into the dusk of the planet of the apes. It's nice to be back and to see so many of you here on a Saturday night. A lot of you do appear to be in college. I was in college at one time. I was in college, actually, during the time that the last Brontosaurus was shot during a break in a meeting of the National Rifle Association. I'll tell you, when I was in college, we did not actually go out to listen to people speak on a Saturday night. We certainly didn't come out on a Saturday night to hear, shall we say, older men speak. In fact, we had a saying. It said, don't trust anybody over 30, and we really meant it. Saturday nights, though, those of us who were male did some interesting things. I mean, we would, for example, go to somebody's apartment and have a bottle or two of Boone's Farm apple wine, 99 cents a bottle. And then we'd sit in beanbag chairs and listen to Jimi Hendrix LPs, that's long play records. And then after that, we would undoubtedly go out and probably stop, because we were always protesting something. We'd probably find some way back in the late 60s to protest the Vietnam War, because we sure as hell did not want to go in the jungles and fight people we never even heard of prior to about 5 years earlier. And we not only did that because we wanted to avoid going to war, but we had heard from folk singer Joan Baez that girls say yes to boys who say no. So it was a second reason to go and protest. And then if we were really super cool, we would actually go to the Afro-American Student Center because we actually did know one African-American, probably from our sociology class, and it appeared to make us more militant to drop by for a few minutes. So the bottom line is, when I was in college in the late 60s, we would not be sitting where you are. And I don't mean just we would not be in a lecture hall listening to somebody. I mean, we would never have been in Columbus, Ohio, because we even had a folk song about that. It just was really simple. Saturday night in Columbus, Ohio is like being no place at all. Oh no, that might have been Toledo. Well, who knows? Are you uncomfortable? You should be a little uncomfortable now, because all of what I've been saying, although all those quotes are real, and that's really what most people in the 60s revolution thought was going on, it contains so many disturbing stereotypes that I think you ought to be, I am certainly, uncomfortable being reminded of some of them. In the 60s, we did think we were going to change the world, and in fact, we saw a lot of evidence. Rock music was not about romance. That was the 50s. In the 60s, rock was revolutionary in its style and in its words. There was, in 1965, the passage of the 1965 Voting Rights Act, which meant the enfranchisement of many people of color, who we thought would certainly vote for people who were more progressive, that we would get our foot in the door. Time magazine even had on its cover the provocative words one week, "Is God dead?" I mean, we thought everything was open in the 1960s, that we had made a substantial change and there was no place for the country to go but up. Unfortunately, we made a few mistakes. And one of the biggest mistakes we made in the 1960s is that we didn't take seriously feminism and the women's movement that was already in existence and was growing by leaps and bounds throughout the 1960s. We appreciated women in the anti-war movement, for example, because they were really good at running something called a mimeograph machine. You know what that is? Little purple things that you use to make flyers and hang them on trees. And they were really good at that. The problem is we didn't take women seriously enough at the myriad of other things they were good at, like helping men to understand what the real struggle was about and the breadth of it and the scope of it in the midst of the activity that we were doing in the civil rights movement and in the anti-war movement. There's some people who write and talk about the 60s who are a little more forgiving than I might be about the mistakes that we made. But I think in the 60s we had a lot of trouble trying to figure out how to deal with people who were non-mainstream. Dr. Martin Luther King learned about nonviolence from a man named Bayard Rustin, a name almost lost to history. Why? Because Bayard Rustin was gay, and that was a thing you could not say. You could not say in the 1960s. And then what about others? Civil rights leaders sometimes ignored another big swath of the population. I'm often asked, well, if humanists and atheists are so moral, where were they in the civil rights movement? And the answer is they were in the front lines of the civil rights movement, but they could not dare to talk about what they didn't believe in. You know, civil rights marches tended to have at the very front of them one rabbi, one Catholic priest with a collar, and one obvious Baptist minister. But to think of extending that and actually having someone who was a non-theist actively participating in that movement was absolute anathema. Atheists in the 1960s rarely could get their own books printed by private printers because the hostility level against those of you who are atheists and people who were atheists was so enormous. Atheism was persona non grata in every social movement. You were there, but nobody wanted to recognize you for what you were. Just like the LGBT community was there, but people didn't want to recognize them either. I think young secularists have been in the movement of not making this error of eliminating and forgetting about feminism carried on into the modern day. I mean, I obviously follow a lot of blogs of humanist and atheist groups, and you talk about things like sexual harassment, like giving equal air to men and to women, and talk about it very boldly and bluntly, and sometimes it upsets a whole lot of you. I'm glad you're talking about it, because a whole lot of other groups that in fact end up seeing the same realities simply want to cover it up and don't want to talk about it at all. It's very good to bring it up again and again and again. If we don't do that, then we once again will lose the opportunity to hear the real voices of the people who, in that case, still hold up 51% of the sky. I like speaking to theists. I like speaking to atheist groups. I'm used to being asked how we can all work together. And we absolutely have to do that. Secularism, you know, has two meanings. It can mean, as atheists mean it, no, there is no God. For those of us who are theistic secularists, we are willing to consider the possibility of spirituality, of divine presence, but we do know this, that the government of the United States has no business weighing in on that question. None at all. It is not up to government to start, it's not up to government to pick and choose what the best religion is or whether religion is better than non-religion. That is simply wrong. But even some progressive Christians and Jews and some non-theists just distrust people enormously with an alternative viewpoint. When Senator Joseph Lieberman was running for vice president with Al Gore in 1996, early in the campaign, Senator Lieberman made the following statement. He said, George Washington refused to indulge the supposition that morality could be sustained without religion. In other words, he's saying you can't be a moral person without religion. Well, for about a week after he said that, myself and leader of the Jewish group, the Anti-Defamation League, Abe Foxman, literally lived on cable television bemoaning the idiocy of that statement until finally Lieberman had to admit that he had misspoken and that, in fact, you could be a non-theist and still be a moral actor. 1996, I'm glad he got around to seeing the truth. Cuts both ways. After a speech I gave to the Triangle Free Thought Society in North Carolina, the organizers took me out to dinner. The woman sitting next to me said, you know, I don't know if I can do outreach to the religious community. I said, why not? She said, well, because those people believe I am going to hell. I said, hold it. I bet that if you go to many of the progressive congregations in North Carolina, what you're going to find not only is the people that don't think you're going to hell, those people don't even think there is a hell. We have to get over this idea that every time an atheist speaks to a theist, the atheist is somehow coming from a position of weaker moral strength. And we also have to get over the idea that every time that atheists speak to theists, the theists are secretly trying to convert them to some belief in Jesus, Muhammad, or the flying spaghetti monster. So that's my first. Everything that we learn about stereotypes from the videos and from various sessions that I attended today, we got to get rid of stereotypes. They're a killer. They're a killer to any movement, and they're a killer to joining movements together appropriately in ways that are going to make a difference. The second thing I'd like to say, and I think I've learned a couple things in my life of activism to date, it's sometimes good to have enemies, but it's a good thing not to make everybody who disagrees with you your enemy. There is a difference. When I worked at the American Civil Liberties Union and for the last 21 years working for Americans United, I took positions on a whole lot of issues that really upset the late Jerry Falwell, the still living James Dobson, and the still living Pat Robertson. It's a good thing that I irritated them because in the long run, you can often benefit by having people go ballistic about what you are doing. And here are a couple of examples of that. Sometimes the leadership of the religious right would back into things that were even wackier than the things that they said directly. Falwell's magazine once had an unsigned article about Tinky Winky, the popular and purple character, the Teletubby, on PBS's children's programming, suggesting that this character was actually promoting the so-called gay lifestyle because obviously he was purple, which is a gay color. I used to wear this every time. It's a type of like 75 purple ties just because I liked to annoy Jerry, and many times I met him. And also, of course, Tinky Winky also had what Falwell thought was a purse. It was, we all know it was a magic bag, but he thought it was a purse. And all the other Teletubbies had colors, too, that were suspicious, including red, which, of course, represented communism. We sent out a press release about all this when it was discovered in the Falwell magazine, and it became the most ridiculous thing. Everybody ridiculed it. Every radio, television program, every editorial page ridiculed Falwell for making these assumptions. And then one day, ABC News asked him, Jerry, are you concerned about all the ridicule that you are getting because of this Tinky Winky argument? And he said, absolutely not. Every time that I go on television to talk about this, I am promoting Jesus Christ. Because we all know that Jesus Christ was really, really into the quality of children's programming. Pat Robertson says a lot of weird things, too. He was the guy who said he could prevent hurricanes from hitting Virginia Beach, the place where his broadcasting empire exists. But even he, we once decided to test whether he would accept as true the things that he may not even have written personally that appeared on his website. And of all of the strange things that appeared there, my favorite one was just 2 years ago at Halloween, when he announced on his website that witches had poisoned that year's supply of trick-or-treat candy. See, how fringy can you get? See, when you do that stuff, eventually even conservative politicians start to avoid you because you are just too weird even for them. And that's exactly what happened with both Robertson and Falwell before he died. It was hard for mainstream conservatives to even stand next to them in photo ops because they were so bizarre. That's a good thing. It doesn't ruin their movement. It's still alive and as well as it's ever been, but it is reduced in power and the ability to organize because its leadership was tainted by its own idiocy. Another value in ticking people off is that sometimes it gives you a kind of street cred because they get really ticked off and say silly things about you. Brother Falwell, before he died, he called me a lot of things. A left-wing thug, a rancher without any cows, never having been on a farm in any length of time. I don't know what that meant. Pat Robertson called me a ferret, an intolerant jerk, lower than a child molester. He also has falsely claimed on a number of occasions that I have said that if a church is on fire, the public fire department cannot put it out. Depends what church. Anyhow, all this is to point out that sometimes enraging the other side gains several kinds of political advantage. You don't have to have any national megaphone like I've been lucky enough to have. You can do this at the local level. You can do it in your city council. You can do it in your college campus. Some of the rhetoric and images that do get utilized are a little over the top even by my standards, and I think you should be cautious about that. But certainly it is a good tactic to make it clear when things are absurd that you point them out as being absurd and you point your finger at exactly who said it, exactly what organization did it, because in the long run, that's essential information for the later organizing that you're going to do. So I urge that. Third principle, complain at every good opportunity about anything that's wrong, anything that is making you feel like a second-class citizen, but don't convince yourself, delude yourself into believing that every single opportunity is a good one, because some aren't. I just happened to see this week that a story resurfaced, an old story, about a Kentucky bank teller who was allegedly fired for saying to one or more of her customers, "Have a blessed day." Now, that phrase actually irritates me as a theist. It irritates me a lot. But consider, how significant is it to get someone fired for that purpose? Because now she has become a martyr for the religious right, and she will forever become an example in the panoply of religious right victims of someone that people like us got fired, lost her job just because she made a statement we didn't like. There were some comments about this story this week on atheist blogs, and some of the atheists said, well, we're really not too worried about that. When we hear blessed day, we think the blessings of liberty. And go with that if you believe it. I think it's a kind of a stretch. My question is this one worth falling on your sword about? I'd say no. How about another one, though, that a lot of our own members at Americans United, whenever we get involved in the second issue, they say, well, why do you waste time on it? And that's the war on Christmas. It's July. This is the time to think about snowflakes, if there ever was. I think the war on Christmas is a big deal. I think we ought to be irritated every time government tries to promote the holiday of Christmas. Why? Because, one, it's the default position of every politician in America that is open about it, at least. There may be one or two atheists in the House, but they sure are not talking about it in Washington. It's the default position. Anytime that you promote, using governmental resources, Christmas, you are promoting a Christian holiday. I mean, I know that pagans had trees and all of that, but fundamentally, December 25th would not be a holiday in this country but for the push from Christians. That's why it's there. It's never going to be repealed. Trust me on that one, too. Just like that award. Trust me, we're never repealing Christmas. But that doesn't mean that we made a mistake back decades ago that we can allow to get even worse by the daily promotion of this during November and December and increasingly in October. It's pretty much you put the pumpkins away, get out the Christmas trees and the baby Jesus. Put the baby Jesus under the tree, and you have a perfect confluence of the secular and the sacred. So I think it's worth fighting also for another reason. One of the things about the war on Christmas rhetoric is that it shows you how big the lying is that goes on the religious right about these issues. For example, a couple of years ago, the biggest war on Christmas story involved Dodgeville, Wisconsin. Dodgeville, Wisconsin was allegedly a place where the local elementary school was so hostile to Christianity that it took a play that had contained the song Silent Night and had removed all religious references. Specifically, I rarely do this, sing. But they changed Silent Night to the following, Cold in the Night. The religious right went nuts over this. They changed the words of a hymn just to be politically correct. So we, of course, looked into that, as we do with many of these issues. We found out a couple things. Number one, that play was written by a Christian who had himself removed those words because he wanted it to be secular and he wanted the play about homelessness to be open to anybody's interpretation. Well, the school district, though, by the time we figured out what had actually happened, had a whale of a lot of trouble and spent thousands and thousands of dollars hiring a public relations firm to correct Fox News, the Drudge Report, and all the other big liars who had told this story in a false and completely false light. I thought that the principal of the school did an absolutely brilliant thing. She held a press conference after about a week of this and sent a letter to the right-wing legal group that had started and fomented this whole thing and insisted that they send her a check to pay for the public relations firm they had to hire to correct the lies. That was 2.5 years ago. They are still waiting for the check. They didn't get it. They're not going to get it. But these kinds of things come over and over and up, over and over again, a guarantee of more evidence every year that the religious right will lie about anything, will create stories, will create fictions in order to try to befuddle the American people into believing there is some kind of orchestrated war against the very celebration of Christmas itself. So I think we do need to not worry too much, in my judgment, about blessed days, but promotion of holy days we ought to worry about a great deal. And then when it comes to the things that matter the most, we need to bring out the nuclear weapons. And the nuclear weapon example that I think should be, and probably is, on the minds of most of you, is the disastrous decision in the Hobby Lobby case just 2 weeks ago. This is a case. The story about this in the beginning was, it's a very narrow ruling, meaning it only affects a couple of women, but it doesn't. That's not true. First of all, its application on its face was horrendously bad for women's reproductive health. That was bad enough. But now we know that already this is starting to spread out, corrupting other issues, corrupting other federal laws, local statutes that prevent other kinds of discriminatory treatment. So it is a big deal. Within the decision itself are the seeds of a whole lot of mischief and problems that are going to be created for Americans of all stripe. If one closely held corporation can deny 4 out of 20 methods of birth control, why can't Scientology-owned businesses, of which there are many, decide that mental health counseling outside of the use of e-meters will not be covered by their insurance because they do, as I'm sure most of you know, hate psychiatry in principle. What about Jehovah's Witnesses who do, in fact, not themselves use whole blood products in the majority of the surgeries in this country because they don't believe in it? Well, then why should they cover it for others? After all, your mortal soul is in danger using those products. In Hobby Lobby, the argument was these 4 methods of birth control are really not birth control. They're not contraception. They're really abortion-inducing. They're abortifacients. Now, that is almost certainly junk science as creationism or climate denial. But nevertheless, it is their religious view. It is a religious view, and therefore 5 members of the court, as Harry Reid misspoke, of 5 white men in the majority of the Supreme Court, although one does wonder, doesn't one, about whether it was wrong. Hobby Lobby is a fraud. Hobby Lobby is a bunch of liars also. Because if you want to be as pure as Caesar's wife, if you want to make sure that there will be no coverage of these so-called abortion-inducing uses of birth control, then you better be consistent. They are not consistent. They do not present a panoply of all available birth control methods to their women employees, but they do allow those same women employees a variety of investment vehicles, which include investing in mutual funds that invest in the very pharmaceutical companies that make the so-called forbidden abortifacients. Is that being as pure as you can be? No, it's just being conveniently pure when the people you're hurting most directly are young women of reproductive age who want to make their own moral choices. Then there's that small problem Hobby Lobby has with China. They do, of course, buy hundreds of millions of dollars worth of products every year from China, a country that still has effectively a forced abortion policy. Doesn't seem to bother Hobby Lobby's bottom line one bit. And of course, the ultimate fraud, if you take away from women the most effective means of birth control, you guarantee 2 things. There will be about a 40% increase in unplanned pregnancies, and at least half of those will lead directly to abortions. So if you want to stop abortions, the way to do it is not to prevent people from obtaining what they choose with medical advice to be what turns out with scientific studies to be the very best method of not requiring abortions in the first place. So the hypocrisy of this organization is absolutely astonishing. So what are we going to do about that? Well, we're going to do what we always do about things. First, you look to legislation. Is there any way to overturn it? When I left Washington yesterday, 41 Democrats had supported what's being called the Not My Boss's bill, a bill to overturn this one bad, not all, but this one bad effect of the Hobby Lobby decision regarding contraceptives under insurance plans. All 41 of those people were Democrats, but not all Democrats are on it. Harry Reid said he might want to vote on this next week, so if you are around, to anybody, even, there are plenty of Republicans who know in their heart contraceptives are available and ought to be available, and that this was a silly decision. So it's time, like between now and maybe Thursday, get in touch with your elected officials and try to get this passed, even if John, I weep too much Boehner doesn't bring it up in the House. Now see, there's another stereotype. This woman over here is stereotype. It's okay for men to cry like John Boehner. It's just you have to be damn sure you're crying about the right thing, and he's not. We're going to do that, and we're going to do everything else. We know that we have the power to educate. We know that when we march, we get noticed. We know when we put up great signs. We had these great signs outside the Supreme Court. Had a picture. This is a generic picture. I don't do these PowerPoints because I'm afraid they cause autism. But we had this thing. It was just a big cardboard thing out of a generic craft store, and it said, not a church. And we had a picture of the Bible, and it said, not a health care plan. We took those things. One of those little creations of a very talented person on our staff was shared on Facebook 57,000 times, which I'm told is a really good thing. No, I'm not that. Come on, I have a Facebook page. So you do that. You educate people. Does education work? Yes. Here's why it works. Here's why, as you sit here today, we've got 10 rough years ahead of us. Whether you're a secularist who's a theist or a secularist who's an atheist, we got 10 rough years. But we're going to win. And here's why we're going to win. When you go to public opinion polls and ask the American people, what do you think about, the fact that we're still giving out hundreds of millions of dollars to religious groups that discriminate in hiring based on religion? 2/3 of Americans say, well, that's wrong. That's wrong. We convinced them. We got their hearts and minds in the right place. We just have to get the politicians and the courts in the right place, and we win. 2/3 of Americans say that if you have a tax exemption, you should not be promoting or endorsing candidates for public office. That is the law. That's illegal. The Obama administration hasn't enforced the law for 4 years. But it is the law, and the American people agree it's a good one. Churches should not get to take its tax-exempt money, use it for the purposes of endorsing or opposing candidates. We've won. Even the religious right's own pollsters in the group, the Barna Group, have found that a majority, close to a majority now, we're inching up, of young millennial Christians are starting to accept the evidence of evolution, vastly more than their parents' generation. 64% of evangelical conservative millennials support marriage equality. 64%. Last time I checked, that's a majority, and it's going up and up every year. Rick Santorum he said once when he was running for president, I think he's running again, but he's also making movies. He's making movies now, so he may not. Yeah. Dan Barker and I don't know, I didn't talk to Dan about it, but we're in his new film. He's making a film that's coming out in September. We consider ourselves the stars of the film. It's something about persecution of Christians. So it's fiction. But Rick Santorum said when he was running for president last time, he was opposed to giving more college assistance to students. Because you send your child to college, and he or she will become an atheist. So you don't need to send them there. Well, I don't know that he's right statistically about the whole atheism thing, but he sure is right about something. You send a child to college who has not had any teaching about evolution, they're going to accept the evidence of evolution because it's better. And that we do know. If they have been taught, for example, that gay people are going to attack them in the dormitories, they're going to live with someone that they find 4 months into their freshman year is living on their floor, is gay, and has not attacked them in the bathroom. And that kind of reality is going to seep in, and they're going to change their mind. And that 64% is going to go to 66 and 68%. We're winning these issues on the ground because we're educating people by living and talking about the issues. We're getting the information out, and we're getting it out in whatever means is necessary. We're going to keep marching till it works. We're going to keep organizing till it works. We're going to keep talking till it works. We're going to keep living the life we want to demonstrate that whatever else we are people dedicated to this principle, that there is no one in America who, because of her or his belief in a God, or the purposeful universe, or any of the myriad philosophical questions we've been dealing with for the past 2,000 years. No one is a second-class citizen because of those beliefs. And that's the message we've got to take forward. And in a decade or so, so many people are going to believe it, that even 4.5 plus 1 white man on the Supreme Court is not going to be able to change that. And we're going to go back to understanding that the best thing this country has ever created and sent out to the world is the construct of a separation between church and state to keep a decent distance between the institutions of religion and the institutions of government for the sake of all of them. Thanks so much for listening. I don't know if we're out of time. We're probably out of time. We're out of time. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We've got 10 minutes for questions, and I'm happy to answer any questions. I was a talk show host with Pat Buchanan. I was a talk show host with Oliver North. One of the things you learn being a talk show host is if you are asked a question you don't know the answer for, make it up. Sir.
First, on behalf of, I'm pretty sure I speak for a lot of Pennsylvanians here, I'm sorry about Rick Sandsborough. Secondly, one thing that I've heard as of late was that not only do we have to focus on making sure we've elected the right people into our federal offices, but also into our state, county, and local offices, even into our school boards. What would you agree with that, and what would you add to that?
Yeah, the question is, what about local elections? Really important. Ralph Reed, the man who ran the Christian Coalition during its heyday, he got into a little Enron-related trouble after that, and a few other problems, but he ran the Christian Coalition at its heyday for Pat Robertson. He once said, and I think he honestly meant it, he would rather have control of 10,000 school boards in America than to control the White House itself. He knew that local politicians make a lot of decisions. Your local state and local legislatures make a lot of decisions that have as much impact on your life as what the guys in Congress do. They do pray, though, in Congress every day. And when we filed a lawsuit to try to prevent only Christian prayers being prayed in a town called Greece, New York, we lost that case. The Obama administration was against us, in favor of this, under the theory that if a city council couldn't pray all Christian prayers, that might have a negative impact on the prayers in the House and Senate. To which I would have said, had I seen the president the day he filed that, Mr. President, do you really think that prayer has helped John Boehner pass really good legislation? Because if you don't, you just ought to skip it. Yes, I can't see too well out there. Who's got the hand? Sir, over there.
Yes, do you foresee possibly in the near future, well, the possibility that Hobby Lobby and other companies of their ilk will try to institute prayer plans in lieu of health plans?
Will they? Yes. The question is, will companies perhaps institute prayer plans instead of health care plans? You know, I think under this decision, closely held corporations could well do that. By the way, 50% of Americans work in closely held corporations. So when you hear the right-wingers say, well, this is a narrow decision because it only affects closely held corporations, that's half of what we're all working in. So it is serious. I think you're going to be able to make those arguments. They're already trying to make arguments like this. We don't agree with equal pay for equal work. Why? Because the scriptures say Christ is the head of the church. The husband is the head of the family. Most husbands are men, so we have to pay them more. I'm not making this up. There's already a big lawsuit about this in the federal appeals court, and after Hobby Lobby, I'm really nervous about that case. This is really big. Ma'am,
could you elaborate a bit? You mentioned earlier the Not My Boss's bill.
yes.
That was supposed to counter one affecting the Hobby Lobby rule. What effect specifically is that meant to counter?
Okay, I couldn't hear the very end of it.
What effect specifically specifically is that meant to be countering?
It is meant to prohibit companies to prevent companies from not including any contraceptive methods that have been listed in the preventative care provisions of regulations issued under the Affordable Care Act. So it's narrow, and we do support it at Americans United, but we don't think it's the full solution, because we do think that the decision has the seeds for all kinds of nonsense, including about equal pay, including about discrimination against the gay and lesbian community. We know that's already happening. I just saw literally 12 hours ago, a story, some hotel that does weddings but is not doing a wedding now because they discovered one of the participants was a transgendered person. And they're going to claim the same bill, same decision for that bad decision. Sir?
You mentioned before about the war on Christmas.
Yeah.
I feel that a majority of the fervor around war on Christmas is generated by Fox News.
Yeah.
So, with that in mind, how do you think the perception presented by the media can either help or hurt secularists?
Yeah, it's an excellent question, because you're right. It starts at Fox News. And if you look, though, what happens, it goes from Fox News to the Drudge Report. Then from the Drudge Report, it becomes news. And then almost every year, you see the New York Times and the Washington Post and the Associated Press doing a story on whether there's a war on Christmas. And of course, because they are more fair and balanced, unlike Fox, they do have, quote, two sides presented. There is a war, there's not a war. As if there was an equal sense of on one side as there is on the other. So the pollution that is caused by Fox News is very real. It's getting worse. I mean, Rob Boston, who some of you know, and I used to go on Fox a lot. We only begrudgingly show up there now, because it really is, it's just worse than ever. Absolutely worse than ever.
No pants rule.
What?
No pants rule. Have you heard that? Have you heard that?
No.
Women anchors aren't allowed to wear pants. They can only wear skirts.
What?
Wow. That's a memo. That's from Roger Ailes.
I'll defer to your judgment on that. I haven't heard that, but nothing surprises me. Let's start right back.
Thank you, Reverend Lynn. I have a theory. I want you to grade it.
Yeah.
I think that this fall, in these midterm elections, this will be the first time where there will be a measurable result from the non-religiously affiliated voter. When you look at Texas, when you look at Virginia and other states where women are showing up en masse to vote, particularly on the issue of reproductive justice, you see, well, Eric Cantor lost, and you see Wendy Davis is, likely to become governor. But I think that this fall is going to be when that box that says non-religious voter gets ticked in a manner that we will be able to track that and look at trends and news stories. Do you think that holds any water?
Yeah, I give it a B+. I'm not sure. I'd like to be sure, but I'm not sure. But the trend is going to be clear, and it's going to be up. But whether it's enough to have that kind of effect, remember, Eric Cantor did lose, but you don't even want to think about the guy that beat him. So we have to be a little careful. There will be some other Tea Party losses, perhaps, but I'd be a little nervous about who's going to take their place. You have to go over here, and then you go here, and then we'll go down here.
How do you spread to all 50 states? Because of state sovereignty is pretty important to go. There isn't 50 of you, and yet you kind of need to go to each state and make sure that.
Well, we do have 2 people on our staff who just primarily work just at the state level, which I think is improper grammar. They work at the state level whenever their state legislatures in working, and they try. What you have to do is you have to link up with every other group. If there's an American Atheist group there, if the National Association Teachers group, the American Federation of Teachers, the NEA is there, you work with them on vouchers and not giving money to religious schools. You work with the groups and then what we try to do is to make sure that if something has happened in Florida that's going to happen in Alabama, if we've won in Florida, we're going to tell people what worked there in the hopes that they can institutionally do it on their own, either in coalition or in the chapters of Americans United that exist in about 40 of the 50 states. Down here, yes.
Yeah, so speaking of the sort of like poison, the sort of media and stuff, you were talking about the case of the bank teller, who was apparently fired for saying have a blessed day, and then right after that you were talking about the lies on the war of Christmas. I don't know if you guys have heard this, but apparently the story of the bank teller is far more complicated, that she had been telling customers that, and customers had complained multiple times. She had been given multiple warnings. She had also been sending out Christmas cards trying to convert her coworkers. It was after a whole train of those incidents in which she was told to stop and she refused to stop that she finally was fired because they were losing business because the customers were unhappy. So, the sort of media that tells you she got fired for telling someone have a blessed day, that's as big a lie as, taking the Christianity out of Silent Night.
Yes. I think it is, and I normally would have brought that up, but I'm running out of time, and I skipped that point. But yeah, that's probably going to turn out to be a big, big fib. I think there's a sign that says I need to stop. I want to thank you for being here, and I want to thank you for the work that you do.